Story 1. I have a meta-conspiracy, I think. Basically, conspiracies like flat Earth, unidentified flying objects, etc., are purposely propagated to ensure there are always conspiracies circulating. The benefit of this is it automatically causes people to doubt actual conspiracies that are being highlighted. If we can be trained to see each other as weird and an outcast when we bring up something that seems like a conspiracy, then it will make it easier to carry out dubious actions against the public in the future. Story 2. In 1983, a KGB agent defected to the United States and described a process called ideological subversion in an hour-long interview. This process describes how the KGB manipulates certain cultural institutions like academia and the media to demoralize the country and encourage its downfall. It would surprise me not one bit to find out this was going on today. Story 3. UFOs, but it's not as interesting as people think. Say a civilization can manipulate gravity and space-time. They just pop over to Earth to look at us the same way we stop to look at a colorful iguana. Story 4. Pharmaceutical companies are not our friends and will manipulate studies, misconstrue data, omit negative findings, pay kickbacks to doctors, and are run by former members of the Food and Drug Administration and vice versa, all without consequence. Their goal is to keep as many people as lifelong subscription customers and make as much money as possible. They will sponsor mainstream news and politicians to push the agenda that their products are the savior of humanity. Oh wait, all of that is already verifiably true. Story 5. That the coronavirus was designed to wipe out China's increasingly growing elderly population to free up resources for the government and younger populations, allowing birth rates to rise and investment to flow again. At the rate they are going, China will cease to be a modern economy in the next 10 years. Erasing a large portion of the elderly population could help promote economic growth and stave off disaster, and that is what they were designing with the coronavirus. Only it got out too early and changed the world for 3 years. Story 6. The Earth is round. I would not be surprised if one day some very advanced scientific method arrives and, oh surprise, they demonstrate that the Earth is actually round. Story 7. The government or those in power intentionally allow harmful things to become popular to make us more docile and less capable of contention. Additionally, pharmaceutical companies are well aware of many of the accidents that occur before they happen or before they release certain drugs. Story 8. I read a study that said people who believe in conspiracy theories, like the government knowing things or a small number of people running the world, have a problem realizing that things in this world are random chaos. They can't handle the idea that things are unorganized. Things happen. It's how you react that makes the difference. Do you know what is going to happen in your own life? No. You can shape your life, but you cannot take the variables out. Imagine the variables when dealing with 380 million people. Then add foreign influence. It's complete chaos, not a grand conspiracy. Story 9. Congress, White House, Supreme Court, actors, clergy, trust fund babies, athletes, musicians. These people per capita are pedophiles at 10 times the rest of us. Story 10. I am not one for them, but honestly, I would not be surprised if we find out many years later that COVID-19 was bioengineered as a way to cripple a country's economy while being an alternate way to trim out the elderly. Story 11. Everything you do with your mobile device is monitored and accessible, not necessarily actively, but your data, such as compromising photos, videos, or conversations, is stored somewhere and can be used against you by the authorities should the need arise. Story 12. That the search for alien life stopped over 6 decades ago. Why? Because they made contact with us around then. Now we are being drip-fed information so that when they reveal the truth to us, it won't be so shocking. Story 13. Sports as a whole is an extravagant match-fixing ring. We all know professional wrestling is fake. We know some people throw matches or shave points, but I am suggesting the entire system is corrupt. Do I think it is true? No, but it is my favorite conspiracy. Story 14. There is a very real component to American politics that actively works to subvert, dismantle, and discourage education. This is both at the secondary level and also at the most basic schooling. An uninformed population is unaware of the system they engage with daily, from grocery stores to drive-thrus and manual labor. The more educated a population becomes, the more they demand from their government and communities for a higher quality of life. They are less willing to engage in low-wage jobs and live in inadequate conditions throughout their entire life. The less they are willing to go without. Some might attribute this to political party lines, but the reality is capitalism relies on the world needs manual laborers too. It requires uneducated workers who will accept low-paying wages and undesirable jobs. Policy that would provide sufficient high-quality education fails repeatedly. Do you know why? It's like wanting a backhoe to become self-aware and write poetry. It's better to keep it uneducated. Please note, I use the term manual laborers, but no offense to any skilled tradespeople. I have done my fair share of it, and skilled trades are valuable and worthwhile. I'm not talking about you. I am referring to those barely trusted to pick up a shovel. We all know people like that. Story 15. I would not be surprised if either of these was true. 1. COVID was intentionally created and released by the Chinese government in order to harm the West. If it was not intentionally created and released, that the Chinese government knew they had an epidemic on their hands well in advance but let their people continue to travel internationally anyway, again to harm the West. Story 16. That flight MH370 was shot down by the United States military. I watched a documentary on this. One of the victims' family members was allegedly approached by a United States military official who told him that the United States military knows what happened. A journalist then presented a theory about how a convoy arrived at the airport under armed escort. There was also a huge training operation for the United States military going on in the region at the time. The escorted convoy unloaded a bunch of cargo which, according to a shipping manifest, contained communications equipment and such. They loaded it onto MH370, the wrong plane, without scanning it. Scanning it would have told them exactly which plane it was due to be loaded onto. So the theory is that someone went, "Hey, guys, what the hell happened to that equipment?" And then they realized it was loaded onto the plane that was headed for China. This is bad news as Chinese officials have expressed interest in wanting to acquire American communications tech. So they dispersed 2 airborne warning and control system planes from the nearby training operation, both of which were confirmed to be in the area at the time. They jammed the plane's radar, making it disappear from other systems. Then they asked them to turn back and land. For whatever reason, the captain either disobeys or doesn't understand, so the plane is shot down as a last resort to stop that equipment from getting to China. I'm more inclined to believe this theory because the United States military has been quite careless with sensitive equipment on multiple occasions before. Like that one time they accidentally loaded nuclear warheads onto a plane, flew it across the country, and left them just sitting out on the tarmac for a day and a half without anyone noticing. I'm not saying this is 100% what happened, but human incompetence is a much more compelling and realistic theory than a shadowy cabal that controls the world did it. Story 17. The dark state. Especially when I see those videos of all the different news stations, liberal and conservative, reporting on something and they are all saying the same thing word for word, I wouldn't be surprised if there was one organization secretly controlling both sides. Story 18. That the United States government is behind unidentified flying object cover-up conspiracies. Basically, the government is deliberately spreading a conspiracy that they are covering up alien unidentified flying objects. That way, people keep thinking the unidentified flying objects they see are aliens and not the experimental aircraft they actually are. By making it a cover-up conspiracy, it handles the fact that there is no real evidence anything is aliens. Story 19. The Russian spy agency allegedly infiltrated the German Green Party and convinced them to shut down Germany's nuclear power plants. The Green Party was successful in doing so, making Germany dependent on Russian natural gas. Story 20. Building 7 free falling like a perfect controlled demolition and dozens of controlled demolitions in China falling over like Jenga towers. September 11, 2001. Story 21. People like Alex Jones, Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, and Chris Rufo don't actually believe the things they say. They just make money off of people who do. Story 22. The World Economic Forum has a plan to integrate corporations formally into government decision-making, known as stakeholder capitalism, and finally bring about a true corporate government. Edit, yes, things like lobbying already exist, but I mean in a more formal sense, normalizing corporate involvement in governance by rehabilitating them as socially responsible rather than purely profit-seeking. Story 23. The Central Intelligence Agency exploits underage girls to politicians, business people, and others of influence to blackmail them into doing what they want. Jeffrey Epstein received a lenient deal because he was associated with intelligence. The John F. Kennedy assassination did not happen the way the Warren Commission reported. I suspect that the Central Intelligence Agency was involved, but the situation is complex. High-level intelligence initiated election conspiracy theories to create a group of armed and highly motivated individuals to potentially overthrow the government, if they have the courage. The same applies to numerous continuity of government plans from the 1980s. Story 24. That the Lahaina fires were man-made to allow more large corporations in tourism to purchase land at a low cost, especially areas protected for or by Native Hawaiians. Story 25. New Coke was designed to fail, but it gave Coca-Cola a span of time during which no original Coke was produced or available. After all the original Coke was used up or expired, they announced they would make Coca-Cola Classic. Now, they were able to switch to high-fructose corn syrup without anyone really caring. Story 26. Only about 5 frames of footage were released from the airplane that hit the Pentagon on September 11, 2001. There must not be any cameras in the area except for the one that only had 5 frames of footage for some reason. Story 27. COVID-19 was a test. Orchestrated by whom, I don't know, but it was put in place to determine how people would react and how better to understand and therefore control entire countries. COVID-19 allowed the world to almost stand still, and in doing so, gave almost unrestricted access into how we function without external stimulation, thus allowing us post-pandemic to be malleable to otherwise shocking or outright wrong stimulations. For a few years, the world became an isolated petri dish where external growth was restricted, internal strife blossomed, and physical interaction was replaced by a digital revolution. It gave anyone watching front row seats into our personal lives. Although COVID-19 may be an afterthought, the sheer amount of chaos that is going on now is crazy, and as a people, we just seem to be allowing it to happen. Since COVID-19, we've seen conflict on unprecedented levels, a complete gutting of our rights, billion-dollar companies become almost demigods in their level of control, the justice system being manipulated to benefit those with wealth and power, and an epidemic of loneliness, depression, and desensitization. It's terrifying. Story 28. The one thing I notice in all conspiracy theories is they all lack evidence. Most even have evidence to the contrary. I think people are just naturally skeptical. Of course, once you have proof, it's no longer a theory. Having said that, I wouldn't be surprised if it was proven that National Football League players don't want me to win any of my bets. Story 29. Conspiracy. All conspiracy theories are not real. I just fundamentally cannot believe anyone can coordinate across more than 2 adults. Tops. Cannot even coordinate a family dinner. Story 30. A lot of the pro-diversity, race, gender, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer or questioning content promoted in large organizations, corporations, governments, academia, and so on, has less to do with promoting positive social change and instead is a filtration system designed to filter out anybody who may rock the boat, to see who is a team player and who is not. This matters less on the ground level, where backgrounds are often fairly diverse, and more when you start to get to the manager and executive level, where the backgrounds of people are fairly similar, such as education levels, schools attended, career paths, and so on, and you need to find a way to determine how loyal a person will be to the hierarchy. The same thing happens to highly talented or intelligent people who see through internal political games. They are shunted into positions where they are still of use but will not upset the apple cart. This does not mean that the need for positive change is not necessary in some instances, but the way it is promoted is done with a specific intent in mind. Story 31. It isn't a theory, but Hollywood is an arm of the military. The Department of Defense has collaborated on 2,500 movies over the decades, has been a kingmaker of producers via funding, and tying messaging to money. Journalist David Robb detailed how the Pentagon has been telling filmmakers what to say and what not to say for decades. The unlikely emergence of the Marvel franchise is due to Pentagon money. Story 32. The government, nobles, kings, and queens made up Christianity for the sake of bringing as many people into their army as possible to take over and seize land easily. Not hating Christianity, but just saying it wouldn't shock me a bit. Story 33. After finding out President Lyndon B. Johnson knew President Richard Nixon committed treason by sabotaging the Paris Peace Treaty and kept it a secret for 50 years for fear of the people losing faith in the office of the chief executive. There is not much they could do that would shock me. It would be big news, but they could literally do just about anything evil or against our alleged principles that one can imagine, and it would not be fair to say, I couldn't imagine them doing this, by anyone who has paid attention to history.